Hey, everybody, it's time. 50 conversations with 50 strangers, more. I don't really know how to say it yet because the first 50 conversations with 50 strangers sold out really quickly. So we're on our second batch, whether that's 50.2 or 50 more conversations with 50 more strangers, whatever it is, I think doesn't really matter. What matters is people are enjoying it, and what's happening in this room is sometimes magical, sometimes boring, sometimes completely amazing. So we have no idea what's going on. In all transparency, I have to tell you, I've met Erik before. He was kind enough to have me on his podcast. But in that conversation, he was asking me things about me for the podcast. So I don't really know that much about him. I know that he's from Coeur d'Alene. I know that he has a beard that I am extremely covetous of. I know that he has an American flag in back of him, which probably means that he is proud to be an American.
Sure.
And we're going to find out what all that does mean as we get going. So, um, Erik, welcome to 50 Conversations. How are you doing today?
I'm doing amazing. Thank you so much for having me on your show. Really appreciate you taking the time and speak with me today, man. I'm excited.
I am too. I loved you when we first talked on your show, and I thought, God, we got to do this. We got to have you on.
Yeah, thank you.
So, for those of us who, I mean, maybe the whole world knows who you are, but for those of us who don't know who you are, will you take a moment and tell us who you are and what's important to you?
Yeah, for me, I am Erik Allen. I'm from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and I work full time, but I'm also an entrepreneur who hosts two podcasts. I own a business called Rated MMA, started it in 2012. And in 2017, I decided to start a podcast where I was just interviewing MMA fighters, literally from a walk-in closet for the first 100 episodes because I didn't have space. I wanted to know why they wanted to get into a cage and fight, what drove them to that. And then that sparked the idea of starting my other show called The Bearded Biz, which I had the pleasure of having you on my show recently. And so that's what I do. I'm a podcaster. I'm a full-time work from home dad and love my family. And my two kids, my wife, are definitely the most important things for me in my life.
But you have another job that pays your bills, or your podcasts paying your bills, or you have another job that's paying your
I
bills?
work full-time on top of the podcast.
Full
Yeah.
time on top of that. So
Yeah.
what got you into MMA? Are you an MMA guy? Do you go into a cage? I mean, tell me about that.
Yeah. Great question. I've always been a fan. I grew up watching like ninja movies and Bruce Lee all the time. My dad introduced me to MMA and boxing at a very young age. And I just remember being like a ninja for Halloween for like 15 years straight, It was just like always around. And I remember as a kid, even like my cousin and I being in first grade in kindergarten, walking to the VHS rental store when those were around, and we'd go rent UFC 1 and 2 and 3, and we'd
Wow.
watch those as kids.
Wow.
And so I've always been a fan. I a little bit of training, in karate, a little bit of training in boxing, but I've never actually competed in the cage. And just a huge fan and so much respect for fighters who step in the cage, especially those amateur fighters that they don't get paid anything. They're just building a record.
Yeah. Yeah. They get the heck beaten out of them with the hope
Yep.
that they will eventually get paid something, right?
Exactly.
For
Yep.
showing up.
Yep.
Um, so I love within moments where people share already something that we would maybe not know we share. Uh, my dad was an amateur boxer.
Okay.
And so
Nice.
when we were growing up, my brother and I, he happens to be 4 years older than I.
Okay.
Whenever we would have a disagreement, my dad would take us downstairs and put us on a circular carpet, which he called the ring. Well, and we would box it out.
Wow.
Well, it was a great idea, and it sounds in theory to be amazing. But when my brother's 8 years old and I'm 4 years old, I literally got the shit beaten out of me all the
Yeah,
time.
I'm sure.
so, so
That's great.
I was always more of a chunky kid. My brother more sort of thin and lean.
Okay.
And I realized early on that I didn't have to stay on the carpet. Those were the rules that I was given, but I didn't have to obey those rules.
Right.
And when I did obey the rules, I got the pulp beaten out of me. So I would come in, and I would come running full speed as a kamikaze and throw what is now called in MMA a Superman punch.
Okay.
I would just leap and throw the punch, and my
Oh,
brother
that's great.
and it would hit my. I mean, I'd hit him good, and then I'd run, and we had a pool table on the other side of the thing. So I would just run around the pool table so he couldn't get me. He would go back to the carpet, then I'd kamikaze him again and run around.
Oh, that's perfect.
So I learned early on breaking the rules is easier and more and better for my health
Sure.
than
Yeah.
playing by the rules. And I think that's how
Right.
I've lived my life.
Yeah.
Um, what about MMA excited you enough that you would want to delve into the background and the history of the guys that go in and
When
find
I,
out who they are?
yeah, like I said, I've always been a fan of the sport, but I'm very fascinated by the stories of people. Very fascinated with their backgrounds of where they came from, because I came from a crazy home. I came from a broken home, and dealt with a lot of stuff as a kid that I had to deal with in my teenage years and get through the crap that brought upon me. And now being an adult, looking back and going, man, I survived some crazy stuff. And so I'm very intrigued by the stories of people when I get them on the phone, whether they're a boxer or an MMA fighter for my MMA show, or if they're on my Bearded Biz show, right? I'm very intrigued by stories of how people grew up, how did they get there? And I've had stories from fighters who they have federal offenses and they can't get a real job. So they're fighting to literally put food on the table to feed their kids. To guys who grew up playing, doing karate, and then they just transitioned to MMA, or they grew up wrestling and they transitioned to MMA. And so those stories are always intriguing to me of like, what made you decide to go get in this cage? You're there to hurt somebody. There's someone there to hurt you, but why would you do that? And so it's always intriguing me. And like I said, I'm very fascinated by people's stories.
Yeah, it's when I watch, it's sort of amazing to watch and see what happens.
Mhm.
Because undoubtedly, when guys are going at it, they are going at it.
Yeah.
And then as soon as it breaks, they're hugging each other and picking each other up, and it's like the animosity stays in that ring.
Yep. Yeah.
And sometimes it boils over. I mean,
Right.
maybe sometimes to sell tickets, it boils over, right?
Sure.
But,
Yeah.
but have you found there's a common trait in people that fight and fight for a living, or feel that fighting is the way to get to make something of themselves that you don't see in other people?
I think there's a mutual respect. And I've met a lot of fighters personally, and I've seen a lot of fights personally in live action and things like that. And the one thing that you'll notice with MMA fighters, and I don't follow boxes much, but I think it's pretty close to the same, but there's this mutual respect that when it's time to prep for the fights, the weigh-ins and things like that, it's all about, I hate you, I'm going to get in that cage, I'm going to beat you down, and you're going home at being knocked out, I'm going to knock you out, things like that. After the fight, it's hugs, it's high fives. It's like, hey man, I know this is my job. I got paid to put food on my table. You got paid to put food on your table. That's our main job. And so I think what stands out the most to me for MMA fighters is that mutual respect between two warriors that are literally stepping into a cage to hurt each other. And then no matter who wins, at the end, it's always hugs, high fives. Hey, thanks so much, man, for taking the time. Let's do it again. That type of just mutual respect across warriors.
So it's really interesting that you're on my show right now, because one of the things I've been asking for is, we live in silos. We live in sort of Facebook. The only
Yeah.
people that I get messages from are people that are like me, because the algorithms of Facebook are such that they only feed you one type of person.
Right.
And I've been having on this show all sorts of people that I meet, people like you that I don't know, but they all tend to be of a certain ilk of people.
Hmm.
And what I really want to find out is, how do I get into people that are not that ilk?
Hmm.
Because I have a basic belief system. The basic belief system is, I learned from my 28-year-old daughter at that time. Now she's 30. She's developmentally delayed.
Okay.
So when she speaks and she doesn't get heard, she screams.
Yeah.
When she screams and she doesn't get heard, she tantrums. And when she tantrums and she doesn't get heard, she attacks. And what I finally, after 15 years of putting up with it, I just said, I can't do it anymore. And I said, you got to talk to me without words because I just don't understand your words. And she said, I am Daddy. And she put her finger to the side of her head. And she was telling me that she was transmitting thoughts to my head without me even knowing it. And as soon as she told me that, I realized that I had actually felt that that's what was happening in her. But I just didn't even know she was capable of thinking those thoughts, because when people can't speak, we tend to think they can't think, but that's not true.
Correct. Yeah.
She had much more elevated thoughts than I could imagine.
Wow.
And so we started to have a relationship that was much deeper because I could understand her now and her frustration. And then she never yelled and tantrumed and attacked again after we did that. And that's been lots of years now. What I did then is I took that into the boardrooms of corporate America. I took that into the schoolrooms of education. I took that into the hospitals with doctors and patients. I took that into prisons with jail guards and inmates. I took that into homeless shelters to see if that same theory would apply. Mm-hmm. Do people speak, and when they don't get heard, do they yell? And if they yell and they don't get heard, do they make a scene and create chaos and try and create havoc and try and create disruption? And if their disruption doesn't work, do they attack?
Yeah.
I would love to know if that goes on in MMA. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it can, for sure. I think that there's these fighters that they make a lot of noise because they're frustrated. There's a lot of people who they're not getting the money they think they should, so they're going to raise a lot of noise. And you have these guys that I think they had a mediocre record, but then they started to raise their voice and they started to say things online that they hadn't previous, or things that really push that line of like, is that really nice? Is that rude? Is it respectful? Is it not? But all of a sudden, that's what sells. That's what the big guys are like, hey, he's making a lot of noise online. Tickets and pay-per-views are going to sell. Let's move him up to a pay-per-view part, main card. And that's what you see in Conor McGregor. That's what you've seen in several other fighters that have kind of made this big jump. Is when they first started, they weren't really that big. They're not really that good of fighters, in my opinion, but they're very good with running their mouth. They're very good with marketing. So they know how to push that edge. And people are curious about, they're raising their voice. They're not getting heard. And so then it's like, hey, well, I'm going to step this up a notch. And now they're making multi-million dollars. They're not good fighters. I mean, they're decent enough to be in the UFC, but they're not like spectacular. But it's because they raised their voice that all of a sudden they're getting their way. Right?
Yeah. So it's interesting because that might be the one place where I'm interested to know how psychology of humanity evolves. And I want to know, I'm just interested because it's a really interesting phenomenon, because in the cage, they seem like they're monsters. Outside of the cage, they don't seem like they're all that bad, except if they have to sell tickets, right. and some of them are, there's one guy out now that I can't remember his name, but he's like a very pro-Trump, make America great. He wears a hat, and they have him fighting all the black guys, and he's people hate him, or people either love him or hate him.
Right.
Yep. Right. Yep. Let's talk about you a little more.
Yeah.
What's important to you?
Well, important to me is leaving a legacy for my kids and my wife that neither my wife and I experienced. My wife and I both come from very broken homes. And so multiple divorces on both ends from both parents. And we made a choice before we got married that, hey, if we get married, the D word does not come up in our family. The divorce word does not come up. If we're going to do this, we're going to do this forever. And both of us, we celebrated 15 years of marriage this year, breaking chains of both parents combines marriage, right? Now we are now leaving this legacy with our kids that we're married and we're staying married, and you don't have to worry about us getting divorced. So what's important to me is that legacy that we live, that I leave for my kids and my family, that they don't have to worry about divorce. They don't have to worry about going to dad's house for the weekend or mom's house for the weekend, or having these other people that aren't their parents in their lives. Mom and dad are here together forever, and that's what's important to me.
So there's a common saying that says hurt people.
Yeah.
Broken people break other people. Where did you get the strength to turn that common saying on its head?
It took me a while. I grew up in a church. I, went to church until my parents got divorced when I was 11 years old. And then, dealt with the brokenness for a long time, drug addictions, alcohol addictions, and was in the music business, hanging around backstage, doing that backstage rock star life. And I was working at Starbucks, and this girl invited me to go to this church event, said, hey, it's just kind of this college hangout if you want to come hang out. And I said, yeah, sure, I'll go hang out and see what it is. Well, I got there. There's all these connections of people that I had known in a previous life, or, known in earlier in my life at a school or in college or things like that. And so it was just kind of this weird connection. And I literally was out partying the day before Easter. And I woke up on Easter morning after partying with this band I was managing. And I looked around at my buddy's basement. There's about 15 of us down there. And I was the only one awake. And in that moment, I felt God say, man, you're done. And I quit cold turkey, drinking, drugs, cigarettes, everything right then. Gave my life to Christ that morning in that basement by myself. And I called that girl who had invited me to that conference or to that college age thing. And I said, I got her voicemail. I said, hey, I just want to say happy Easter. Hopefully I'll see you at the Starbucks. 3 months later, we were dating. 3 months later, we were married. And that's our life today, 15 years later.
Wow. So I've heard of the power of Christ. I've seen him in my own life in a different way. I'm not a born again Christian by any sense, okay?
Sure.
But I definitely believe in God, and I believe in the power of God. Can you dive into that moment where you gave everything over and Christ came to you?
For me,
try and paint that picture for people, because I bet there are a lot of people that want to change their life and they're scared to death to give their life over to Jesus.
Yeah.
Or they're scared to death to give their life over to God.
Yeah.
What gave you the courage, first of all, to do that? I mean, you grew up in a church. It wasn't that fulfilling for you.
Right.
All of a sudden now had this experience and you just said, I'm going to do it. And how did that, walk me through like what happened, if you can, and paint as many pictures as you can.
Yeah.
So that a listener can experience what it's like, that moment that the surrender happens and you are filled with something greater than yourself.
Yeah. And it might help if I give you a little backstory. So, when my parents got divorced, I ended up moving to Montana with my mom at 12 years old and her boyfriend, and he was very abusive, beat the crap out of my mom all the time. So I had to watch my mom get the crap kicked out of her on a daily basis. And when I was 13 years old, they came home arguing, and it was like midnight, and it wasn't anything that was out of the ordinary, but I remember brushing my teeth, and I remember feeling this moment in my chest and God telling me, you got to look around. And I didn't know Christ at this time, but I really felt it was God telling me, like, you got to turn around the corner and check on this. And so I turned around the corner, and he's on top of my mom, punching her in the face over and over and over. And I'm thinking, how do I get this grown man off my mom? And the first thing that came to my mind was grab one of those steel frying pans. It's actually the cast iron pans you would take with you camping. And I played baseball for 10 years. I got a good swing. So I swung as hard as I could, and I hit him in the back of the head and split his head open. And it didn't knock him out. He turned around, and he's like mid-sentence of, what the? And as he said that, I smacked him again in the forehead, split his face open, lots of blood. And after that, I went to go live with my dad. And after that, I went to live with my dad. And at that point, he rented us this house. I stayed there by myself. He'd go stay with his girlfriend. So I kind of raised myself through high school. And I was very lost. I had friends. I had like maybe one or two that were close friends to me, but most of them were my stoner buddies. And even when I got into my early 20s, it was people that I would go drink with. And I was very depressed. At 21 years old, I filed bankruptcy. I was $30,000 in debt. And I lived in this very ghetto apartment and could barely afford my rent. But I remember I worked at Starbucks, and I would go get my 6-pack of beer every night after work. And I'd go back to my apartment, and I'd pop in a John Cusack movie because he's my favorite actor. And I'd drink my beer. And that was my life for like a year and a half. I was so lost and so depressed. I didn't really have any friends. And I think, I had a pastor friend tell me that God kind of has us on these puppet strings, where when you sin, he cuts the string and he reties it and he pulls a little bit closer to you or to him.
I love that. I love that.
And I felt like
that before.
My string had finally hit its capacity. and finally hit the hands of Christ. And I remember just that night being out partying, and literally I drank a lot that morning. I woke up on Easter morning, my buddy's basement, and I remember sitting up, and there, like I said, there's about 15 other people passed out on the couch, passed out on the floor. And I just looked around, and in that moment I said, why am I doing this? This is not the life that I want. And it was in that moment that I was like, God, I haven't talked to you for a long time. I know you've been watching over me, but I got to give it all to you right now. I'm tired of this life. Take me out right now. And I literally just had to give that to him. And my life instantly changed in that moment. And from then moving forward, you know, everybody sins, everybody has this crazy life. But that moving forward, my life has been on a really good track. And, you know, of course, that girl that I met and I married, it's now my wife, her and I were both born at 1:41 p.m. Different days, different years, but the exact same minute documented on our birth certificate. So I'm like, God's got something for me and her, that he's got a plan for us to bring us together for this. And so that's kind of the story of how I got to that moment.
Wow. And was there ever a moment where you looked back and said, I just can't do this? I mean, the surrender, that was great then, but I'm too pulled back. I'm too addicted. I'm too going, or was the moment you surrendered, did it vanish and everything else went with it?
Everything else went with it. There was moments when I tried to quit throughout the years prior to that, and I wasn't strong mentally to do that. I would, I'm not going to drink for a day, or I'm not going to go smoke pot, or I'm not going to go do coke. And then it would be like hang out with a buddy. Oh, hey, dude, I got some new coke, or I got some more pot, and I'm right back on it.
Yeah.
And I had to make a choice in that moment. I actually had to call my buddies after giving my life to Christ that following week and say, hey, look, guys, for me mentally, I got to fix myself. I got to take a break from hanging out with everybody for a while. I got to take a break. I got to get my mind right, because I'm not in a good place, and I need to get that fixed before I can come back and start hanging out. And eventually it was about 6 months later that I was able to go hang out with my buddies. They could go to the bar. I can go to the bar with them, no problem. I don't have an issue drinking. I don't have, I could go hang out with them, no problem. But and they understood. I was at this point where I was at that breaking point where I needed to take that break away. I needed to fix myself before I could help others.
It's really interesting. I'd love your thoughts on this. I think we live in a pandemic of times, not only with coronavirus and not only with race relations and not only with Me Too movements and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But I think we live in a pandemic of people not feeling good enough, and people not feeling enough, and people not feeling worthy, and people feeling, sort of, I can't do this. I can't do this. Mm-hmm. And when those people come to me, I surprise them oftentimes, because I say, celebrate that.
Yeah.
How fabulous that you can't do that. Like, instead of trying to fight it and tell yourself you are good enough and you're better than you are and you can and you would and this is great. You can't do it. The truth of the matter is you're being told, and you're bumping up against it all the time. What if you can't do it, but there's something that comes through you that can do it?
Yeah.
And why don't you surrender to that force that comes through you? You can call it whatever you want to call it.
It's true. Yeah.
But just surrender to that force, because that force can do everything. In fact, there's nothing that force can't do.
Right.
And so I love when you say it the way you say it, because the Christians have it down, because I gave my life to Christ. He came into my life. Right. And there's power in that, because he does, but it's a model that I think every religion and every person has to follow, that when you don't feel enough, you reach out and say, I don't feel I can do this. Of course I don't, but I do know that there's something that comes through me that can.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
What makes you happy?
Oh man, it's a great question. What makes me happy is literally, and this is going to sound boring, but what makes me happy is being with my family, my wife, and my kids, right? I mean, that's like, for me, I don't care if it's at the beach or at the house or in the backyard or camping or whatever. If I'm with them, then that's what makes me happy.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. That, by the way, that's not boring at all.
Yeah.
That's wholesome. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Let's mix it up a little bit.
Yeah.
Lightning round.
Yeah.
Cat or dog person?
A dog.
Fabulous. Coffee or tea?
Most definitely coffee.
Milkshake or smoothie?
Smoothie.
Smooth. Okay. Junk food or organic?
Organic. I wouldn't say that 3 months ago, but I organic now.
Okay, I love it. I love it. Weights or cardio?
Right now, cardio.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Would you say you're a person that is in the box or someone who's out of the box?
Out of the box for sure.
Tell me about that.
People think I'm crazy because I wake up at 4 a.m. 6 days a week, and on Sundays I set my alarm for 5. So I give myself a little hour to sleep in on Sundays, but I do that 7 days a week, and I've been doing it for 10 years.
And what do you do? What do you do it for in the morning?
So I wake up and I work out. I'm doing a lot of cardio right now. And I work on my podcast. I work on my craft, right? So I reach out to guests. That's when I'm editing shows. That's when I'm inviting guests to come on my show. That's when I'm releasing my shows. My shows come out every Friday and every Saturday. And I set a big goal in 2020 earlier this year that I was going to release 50 podcasts of each of my shows. Wow. And be a guest on 50 shows and speak from 12 public stages. And so we're on track to hopefully hit those top 3. The public stage has obviously got a little bit of a delay, but being, right now that's my goal is to, get through that. And I think my one thing that I've always kind of said for a while is my desire to be successful is bigger than my desire to sleep. And so that's what drives me to get there and get to that successful point. Because yeah, I work a full-time job and I'm an entrepreneur right now, but that's not the end goal. My end goal is to be a full-time entrepreneur. And so I think that's where I'm outside of the box.
What does success mean to you?
Success to me means that I'm not having to rely on someone else for my income. I'm not having to rely on someone else's time clock or punch the time card. Success for me is being able to provide for my family, but also not miss the moments in life that require me or that I should be. They're like kids getting awards or baseball games or events for my wife, birthdays, things like that don't draw me away from family life where I can make my own schedule. That's success for me.
Love it. Both of these are really important. Okay. But for this moment in your life right now, which is more important for you? Is it more important for you to speak your voice and be heard? Or is it more important for you to create a platform for other people to speak and you listen to them?
For me right now, it's very much to build that platform for others to be heard. I think that a lot of times as entrepreneurs, we want to get our word out. We want to get our voice out and say, oh, I'm the biggest and baddest. But if you're truly an entrepreneur, it's about giving. It's not about the money. The money comes whenever. But if true entrepreneurs, in my opinion, and successful is about giving others the platform to share their story, because that one story could impact 1 million people. Even if it impacts one person, it was worth it.
Yeah. Are you old enough to remember overhead projectors?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll be 41 this year.
Okay. I feel like a dinosaur because there must be a more current example. But it's such a perfect image for me, because an overhead projector, it's a machine and you put plastic sheets on it with drawings or words and it shines up on the wall in front or on the screen in front. I'd like you to put the 2 plastic sheets that I just heard from you on that overhead projector and tell me what you see. The first one was success is being able to not to have to stand up to someone else's paycheck and to just be able to take care of myself and own that.
Yeah.
The second one was how important it is just to hear stories, because you have no idea whose story is going to be there and to listen to people. You have no idea what story is going to impact people's lives.
Yeah.
Tell me what those 2 images come together to create for you.
Man, I think those 2 images come to create for me peace. I've always struggled to be that entrepreneur, the full-time entrepreneur guy. I've always sought out the shiny object syndromes, and I think over the last few years, my mindset has changed to go, yep, I do want that. And what me having that success of not relying on other people to pay my paycheck or to rely on that card But then also being able to give back. That's a huge thing for my wife and I and I think that's really cool that we are married and we both have this passion to give back.
Yeah.
And so I think it's this overhead projector, if I'm to combine the two sheets, it's very peaceful for me if I can have both that full-time entrepreneur, just not relying on anyone else's income but my own, and then being able to allow people to be able to speak their mind, make an impact to the world, which I would call entrepreneurs world changers and success-minded people. And that's the goal of my podcast. And so if I can bring that and I can impact one person from having a guest on my show, not about me, just listening to their story. And sometimes it helps just to get it out. Sometimes people get on my show and they've never been on a podcast before. And it's like, whoa, that just woke me up. and I love that opportunity to be able to be part of that. And so I think that's what that brings is peace.
I want to ask you a question. It's where I told you I suck at lightning rounds, so I'm deviating from it.
Yeah.
No problem. It's going to take a little while to develop the question, but stay with me if you will. Okay.
Okay.
My mom and dad both passed away 2 years apart on the same day, July 4th. Wow. My dad when I was 13, my mom when I was 15. So I'm 65 now. So that's been already 50 and 52 years ago. Wow. It was only about 5 years ago that the meaning that I gave to that event changed for me. When they passed away, the story that I told myself was they passed away on Independence Day to teach me to be independent. Because they wanted me to know you can't really count on anything. It's a ephemeral world we live in. It's here today. It could be gone tomorrow. So count on yourself. Make it work by yourself. Do all this by yourself. It wasn't until I wrote this book, The Mosaic, that I realized I had gotten their whole meaning of their passing and the lesson they wanted to give me wrong. They weren't born on Independence Day. They died on Independence Day.
Yeah.
And so what they were trying to tell me is that when you try and do things on your own, you'll be successful for a little bit, but you won't be successful. You can't make huge impacts by doing everything on your own.
Right.
That there's a process, and here's where the question sort of starts to take shape for you.
Sure.
And I really want your input because I can feel how strong you believe what you believe. And so I want to just challenge that belief, but not to challenge it to say you're wrong and I'm right, to just understand your belief, okay?
Yeah, yeah.
In the work that I do with people, what I see is people are either great takers, which isn't really givers, they're takers. They drain people of their energy.
Yeah.
Right? But elevate that, and they're people that are really amazing givers, and they don't take, they really just give to people.
Yeah.
And they give and they give and they give. But in almost 85% of the cases of people who are great givers, they're not so great at letting other people give to them. They're not so great at receiving.
Yep.
And there's a flow of energy that it seems like it works when it's working in harmony with each other, where the giving gives and then he receives, and the giving and it just continues. Each one gives and each one receives, and each one gives and each one receives, and each one gives and each one receives, and it just gets faster and faster and energized. But when we only give and we stop and we don't receive, then it stops the flow and makes it just so much harder to move forward.
Yeah.
So the place where my question wants to reside on, because I'm sure I'm not understanding it correctly.
Okay.
Is that place in you where I don't want to have to take a paycheck from somebody else. I don't want to have to be able to count. I don't want to have to count on somebody else. I want to be able to just do this. My wife and I want to do this on our own and just give to people and give to people. Who's given to you? Who are you allowing to give? Clearly you're allowing God to give to you. I hear that. But how are you allowing to give to you?
I think that's a great question. And I think you can only go so far in success, in life, in prayer on your own. Like you can only be as good as you can be as one person. But if you start adding a teammate or you start adding someone who can feed into you mentally, a mentorship, a verbal mentorship, a companion, what I like to call your tribe, then I think that's what feeds me, right? Is for me, I have a group of guys that are my core guys that I can sit there and they're real with me. If I screw up, they're going to tell me. If I'm doing something that's not right, they're going to tell me. And I also have this one-sided thing where I listen to a lot of speakers like Ed Milet and Tony Robbins and Les Brown, and Eric Thomas, and those guys. That's what feeds me is their words and motivation and their wisdom. And I spend about 25 to 45 minutes a day listening to those guys over and over and over. And that's what feeds me is my tribe and those, what I would call virtual mentors.
Yeah.
And it is hard as a giver to receive. And especially physical realm things, right? For me, I'm not a physical person in regards to, I don't need a lot of stuff, but I love the mentorship. I love the verbalization of mindset, and not just the fluffy stuff like, oh, you're the best, but like real raw conversations.
Right. I love that too. Good for you. Thank you for letting me understand that more.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you fit into the world, or have you always felt you're a little bit different?
I've always felt I'm a little bit different.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, it just in the entrepreneur side of things. I mean, I started mowing lawns at 10 years old. So I've always been this like driven to make money, driven to be on my own. But I've also come from a background that a lot of people haven't been part of. I haven't met a ton of people that had to go beat up a guy who was a grown man at 13 years old. I didn't meet a lot of people that had to live in a garage in Montana during the winters because there's no room in the house. So I think my story is very unique, but I think it can also relate to a lot of people's stories. But I do think that I've probably that person that's a little bit on the outside.
Yeah. Has that ever resolved for you? Have you ever felt like, so often the way we grow up is the way we maintain. And there's always a part of us that if we grew up feeling a little bit different, like I grew up feeling different too, because my parents both passed away.
Yeah.
So at 13, and I didn't have a dad. At 15, I didn't have a dad or a mom. And as much as my friends commiserated with me and loved me and wanted to help me, and their parents wanted to help me, and friends stood in, they didn't have any idea what it was like for me to not have parents, because they had their parents, right?
Yep.
So I always felt a little bit separated from everything. And I still feel to this day. I went into a monastery. I lived as a monk for 10 years. I mean, I feel like it's manifested in many different ways throughout my life, of that I'm just slightly removed from the world that I live in.
Sure.
Has that been the case for you as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think it's but I don't see it as a bad thing for me. Yeah. For me personally, I almost saw it as an advantage because it did make me stronger, physically and mentally, to get through that. And I look back and I go, I survived that. Like, I got through that. I was a warrior through that. Like I battled through addictions. I battled through financial bankruptcy. I battled through that. And now I'm here today and I'm debt free and I'm healthy and I don't have a divorced marriage or a separated marriage. And that's what kind of sets me apart, I think, is I can get through that. And I'm always going to fight for that. Always will fight for my family no matter what.
Yeah. Do you feel like you have to fight for your family?
I do. And I say that only because the chains of divorce have been generations long on both sides. And I don't like my mom and dad and my mom and my wife's mom and dad both been divorced, married multiple times. Our grandparents were amazing people and they were married for 50 plus years.
Wow.
Right. But so it's like, there's this gap of they were great married and then it just fell.
Yeah.
And so there's, I don't want to say generational curse, but there kind of is. There's this like weight that you don't want to go there. And so we both decided, hey, we're not going to make that. We're not going to allow that to happen in our life. And we have to work hard for it. I'm not going to say that every day is peachy and, riding on rainbows, but as a married couple, you get through that and you figure out how to work through that.
Can I press you a little more? Because I love pressing you, because I love the strength that you come back at.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, is that all right? And
totally.
It's never meant to in any way disrespectful. It's meant totally just to understand, because you're really clear in what you believe.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that moment of surrender where you gave up drugs, alcohol, all the stuff that you were doing. and accepted Christ. And talk to me about the need to fight for something that has been a generational curse on your families.
Yeah.
And where surrender plays a part into that situation.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I had so much weight that I felt like I was carrying on my shoulders from all of the stuff that I let just build up in my life, right? All the divorce, the addictions. I was in jail at 18, like all of that. I just let build on my shoulders. And that moment that I surrendered to God, in for me personally, right? That's everyone's on their own personal journey, but for me personally, when I gave that to God, I did feel that weight of, I don't have to live with that weight of my past anymore. It's a fresh new start right now in this moment. And when I realized that in that moment, I quit having that weight. I quit thinking about like, what could I have done or what should I have done in that moment? But now I'm thinking, what can I do now? What can I get through that? What can I do to make changes in my life and my future life that I don't need to carry around anymore?
Yeah.
You know, and it was that moment that.
So the place, let me center you if I can.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I get that. And that's so, and it's because of that. And it's because of that commitment that I feel is so real in you.
Yeah.
What happens to that commitment in this place where you feel that you have to fight against this divorce curse? Why can't you surrender? Why couldn't you use the same tool that lifted all of that from you before, of this sense of I surrender into your arms, Christ, and I know that I don't have to fight life anymore. I just have to celebrate this life.
Yep.
Because with you, I know I'll be taken care of, and I know I won't have to do that. That it's not that, like, when I feel you.
Yeah.
I feel there's this fight in you for maybe no reason. Like it's almost as in my book, The Mosaic.
Yeah.
Mo meets the gardener. And to make a long story short, the gardener says to him, Mo, what makes it so hard for you to give up the weeds that you have inside you? Mm-hmm. Like you pull them out, but you don't really pull them out. What's so hard for you to do that?
Yeah.
And Mo says, well, I just can't get at them. And I just have this one weed in me that won't let me get at anything else. Mm-hmm. And when the gardener looks at him and goes inside him and tries to feel where that weed is, because he's a gardener, he knows how to get all the weeds out.
Yeah.
He digs within Mo's soul, but the weed isn't there anymore. Mm-hmm. And Mo had met a thief that had told him he had taken something from him, but he wouldn't tell him what it was.
Okay.
And when the gardener sees that weed isn't there anymore. He looks and he sees in Mo's soul, he sees the thief holding the weed. And he says to Mo, do you remember a thief coming to you and taking something from you and you not knowing what that was? A long time ago, he took that weed from you, but you still are fighting your life as if that weed still exists.
Yeah.
It's not there anymore. Let it go.
Yep. Yeah.
It's almost like, I didn't tell it in its entirety because we don't have enough time.
Yeah.
But it's almost like the gardener wants to talk to you.
Yeah.
And say that fight that you've been fighting all this time, you don't need to carry it anymore. The one that you surrendered to is fighting that fight for you. You don't have to fight so hard.
Yep. Yep.
And if you give up that fight, it will be so joyful for you. And you'll, instead of spending your time protecting it, you'll spend your time building it and celebrating it. Does that make any sense to you?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
And I didn't mean to overstep my bounds. It was just like that.
Not at all.
These archetypes become so real in me that I can't help but say it.
No, I love it. Yeah. Thank you. I think it's great.
So take a look and see if that surrender that you made isn't all inclusive to this moment as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. Now that you say that, I think there's definitely been times since then that I've thought about, like, because I've had to experience saving a parent from addictions in the later years, right? So it almost came back right after I gave that, right? And so for a long time, I think I held this burden of like, I don't want to deal with the parents anymore, even after I gave my life to Christ, right? Like, I need to let my mom go, my dad go, and they need to go do their own thing, right? And I think I held on to that burden longer than I should have, even after I surrendered everything to the Lord.
Yeah.
And now I feel like me personally, I feel like I felt like I've released all of that probably in the last 2 years. And the reason I say 2 years is I didn't release my story publicly until I was 39 years old.
Wow.
And it was at that point that I realized that I was like, I got to just let this go. I had not like a handful of people knew my real story. And then I put it out there on YouTube and I said, here's my story. It's an 8-minute version. This is who I am. This is where I came from. Like it or not, that's who I am. And I kind of felt like at that moment, that was the extra weight that came off my shoulders.
Yeah.
I didn't have to fight anymore, right? That was kind of like, here you go. It's out there now.
So for whatever reason, the guy in my head is the little cantankerous son of a gun. He's going to invite you to keep taking a look at that.
Okay.
And just see if there's a little bit more of that weed that you could give up right now.
Yeah. Okay.
And just on your own time, not on mine. I love you. You're doing amazing. Yeah. So I just,
well, thank you.
It just sat with me.
Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Do you feel like you live your life from your head or your heart?
My heart. Most of the time. I say most of the time because sometimes I let my mouth say things and I say that and I go, oh crap, I shouldn't have said that. But I think the majority of my time I live life with heart.
Yeah. I had someone on a podcast that I do. I have another podcast called the Mosaic Podcast, and I had him on. And he said something that just moved me so much. He said he has this practice now that someone taught him, that whenever he feels like he's losing it, he just closes his eyes and says, what would love do?
Yeah.
What would love do in this moment? And that's changed my life. That question that he put in front of me.
Yep.
Do you think you're a leader or a follower?
I'm a leader.
I love that.
Yeah. Yep. I'm a leader.
When you look
I used to be a follower.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's so many questions I have around that.
Okay.
How does a person who surrenders into the arms of Christ become a leader?
Yeah. I think it's a great question. I think that God is always my leader. He's my go-to all the time.
Good.
Right? Like that's part of my morning routine on a daily basis is that, I wake up and it's prayer time, and that's a no negotiable time.
I love that you said that. I love that you said that, because you said you woke up before and you worked on your podcast and you thought you did, and you exercised, but I knew that you woke up to pray that early. So I'm happy to hear that's what you're saying now too.
Yeah. First thing I got to do. Yeah. And that's really what helps me get my day started.
Yeah.
Like that's what gets me started. But I think you can be a Christian and you can be a leader. And I think you can do it in a loving way, right? There's leaders out there that are harsh and they're mean and they try to take advantage of the system and they try to say it's all about me and they go for that money. And then there's the leaders that are sincerely out there to help people, sincerely, genuinely love people. And for me, I know that Christians and people who go to church are probably some of the most judgmental people I've ever met.
Yeah.
And I never want to be like that. Like for me, I don't care your sexual orientation, political orientation, whatever that is. I think the world would be a whole heck of a lot better if we just loved on people, loved them where they're at. And for me, I think if you can do that, you can be a Christ follower and you can be a leader by teaching love and not being judgmental. It's not my job to judge anybody.
Love that. You answered my second question with that answer, because when I look in the world, I see a dearth of leadership. Mm-hmm. I see a lot of people, even in our political realm, where we elect people to be our leaders. But when they get within the silo of their camp that they're in, they don't have the courage to say, this is great what we're doing, but this part we're not doing very well. Right. And we really need to stand up to the momentum of their silo and say, this isn't right what we're doing. We have to stand up against that, because that's what true leadership does.
Yep.
It leads in truth rather than in silo.
Yeah.
And I don't see that in politics. I don't see it in religion. I don't see it in science. I don't see it in healthcare. I don't see it in education. I
Yeah.
don't see many leaders doing that. So if you have that strength, I just want to highly encourage you to walk in that place of leadership where we lead by truth. And to anybody who's listening,
Yeah.
please do the same.
Yep.
Do you think people are more similar than they are different, or more different than they are similar?
I'm not sure how to answer that. I think that they're probably more. I think there's more similarity in people than they realize, and they're not quite as different. And I think that, and the reason I say that is because I think deep down in every single person, there is a love for people. There's a respect for people. Most people, not always, but most people have this in their heart, where if you saw a kid running across the street and he's about to get hit by a car, are going to go out and save that kid. Yeah. Most people would do that. Not all of them, but I think that deep down in the moment, everybody has this love to just love on people, but they have to put on this face. They have to put on this, their mentality gets twisted by media or influenced by other people, when deep down they know that if they just loved on people, man, the world would be so much better.
How would we talk to that group of people? If you had one thing to say that could talk to that quality in people, that could reawaken that side of them, that would find the unity, that would find the similarity, that would find that place, rather than sit just comfortably scared to death and try and point blame at other people and find difference, because it's just not true.
Right. I think it's a tough one. I think that's a tough conversation to have with anybody, because no one wants to be told that they're in the wrong, or a lot of people don't like to be told how to do things. Like there's just not very many learners in the world. I think there are, but there's a lot of people that are very set in their ways. But I think that if we can break it down for them and say, look, almost as an example, and like if you've got someone who's part of Antifa, right, or part of BLM, or part of an extremist Republican group, whatever, right? It's like, if you can sit down and go, okay, look, what if this person standing in the road was your kid? Would you go save them? Or I don't know. I mean, something like, you almost have to get deep down in a personal relationship to them, of like figuring out why they are the way they are. And again, it doesn't matter what side of the spectrum or aisle or whatever they're on, but if you can get down to the point of how did they get to where they're at mentally, okay, that's great, but let's just love on people where they're at and let's go from there. But set all of the junk aside and let's look at it from a human being state. Like, we're all humans. We need to just love on people.
Yeah, for me, it's so beautiful because my 30-year-old developmentally delayed daughter showed me.
Yeah.
When people speak and they don't get heard, they yell. When they yell, they don't get heard, they tantrum. When they tantrum, they don't get heard, they destroy. So I think if we could do more of this, where we just allow people to share their points of view and we have conversations that are not attacking people, but are just really wanting to find more information about how people think and what they think. And we're not trying to change people to our belief system. Like I would never in a million years say to somebody, how can I change you to believe like I believe? That wasn't the question I was asking a moment before. It was asking, what could we do? What could we say? Do you think the world's talking to us now in this time?
I think so. I mean, there's some, the world's a crazy place, man. And I think depending on where you're at in the US and, are you a masker? Are you not a masker? Are you a patriot? Or are you not a patriot? Or are you tearing down statues? Or you don't want to, it's like, there's chaos anywhere you look in the US. Yeah. But I also feel like there's some peace with a lot of people who are like, okay, you know what, that's going on. But if you look at like us personally, unless you're in the midst of the craziness, you can go, man, I'm thankful. I have a house to live in. I got food on my table. I got warm clothes. I got a warm bed to go in. Like, I think if we sit there and we go, I'm grateful for, what am I grateful for? And start to
Love
think
it.
about that. Don't think about the craziness of the political side or whatever's going on in the US. You personally, wherever you're at, if you can be like, man, I have a job today. I have money coming in. I have rent to pay and everything's taken care of. Like, your life is good. And
Yeah.
be, in my opinion, like, pray for those other guys that are out there and pray for peace. But the world is trying to say something to us. There's some chaos going on. I
What do
don't
you
know what
think?
the answer is, right? But
What do you think it's trying to say? Like, if you could slow it down and say, everywhere we turn, there's chaos.
there is.
What do you think it wants to say to us?
I think it goes right back to what I was saying earlier. I really think it's just people just need to love on people where they're at. And whether you agree or disagree with them, that's the cool thing about being a human is you can say what you want, just don't hurt somebody else. If you're not hurting yourself or hurting another person, then go for it.
Yeah.
Right? Just love on them. And I think that's, if people just took those couple things and just loved on people, man, we would see peace, I think, way across the world.
What a great place to end this little conversation for the time being.
Yeah.
Erik, if people have fallen in love with you and the way you present your message, how do they get in touch with you?
I'm on all social media formats, Top Rated MMA, like mixed martial arts, and the Bearded Biz show is just Bearded Biz. Bearded, obviously, the BIZ. And we're on Instagram, we're on Twitter, we are on Facebook, YouTube, and all audio formats from iHeartRadio, iTunes, Shopify, Spotify, all of that as well. And my shows come out every Friday and every Saturday.
Will you be sure to send me a link to those in an email?
Absolutely.
Send me a link to all of your social media links, and also will you send me a headshot so
Yeah.
that I can put it on the cover of the Rolling Stone here of our 50 Conversations.
Okay. Yeah, that's awesome.
For those of you who have listened, I just want to thank you again and again for coming and listening to the show. I think today's conversation was very rich. I would invite you to go back and listen to it and see if there are places you agree with, you disagree with. Think about it. What did you feel as you listened to my questions, Erik's answers? Do you agree with one of them? Do you agree? Don't agree? Did you see in the conversation that we had where there was a slight challenge to Erik and the generosity in which he answered, not the aggressiveness of his answer? It's so beautiful when people can just when they don't feel threatened by the question that's asked, so that they don't have to feel attacked, and they can just answer what they truly believe and have the space to tell what they really believe.
Yeah.
I want to encourage each of you who are listening to do one thing. I want to challenge you. Make it a point to find someone you don't know, whether it's online or in person, and just walk up to them and ask them how they're doing. And don't try and answer, don't try and fix, don't try and change them, don't try and help them. Just listen to them and love on them, like Erik said.
Yeah.
What would happen if we just loved on each other, as Erik is saying? What would this world instantly become?
Mm-hmm.
Let's take that advice. Erik, is there anything you want to say just in final 30 seconds that you can have that you haven't been able to say?
Daniel, I just want to say thank you so much for having me on the show, man. This was an amazing conversation and truly, truly honored to be a guest on your show, man. And to be able to talk to you twice now, really life-changing, man. You are a world changer for sure, brother.
Well, I think you're looking in the mirror and saying that to yourself, because that's how I feel about you, my friend.
Awesome.
I love you. You know, what's beautiful to me is 2 weeks ago, I didn't even know who Erik Allen was. I feel like I have a friend that I can count on in my back, that I can walk with now.
Yeah.
And whatever he believes, I still don't know what he believes. I still don't know what side of the fence he's on, what he thinks on, but it doesn't matter because I love the man.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what he believes or neither one of us is asking the other one to believe like they believe. We're just wanting to share with each other what we do believe.
Yeah.
And stand in that. So if this show can do anything for us, my dream is that it takes a world of strangers and makes them into friends.
Yep.
Because the world looks different when we're a world of friends than it does when we're a world of strangers. The way we act in a world of friends is different than the way we act in a world of strangers. We let friends believe whatever they need to believe, whereas in a world of strangers, we fight belief systems because we're scared of them. There's no reason to be scared of a belief system or another person. Make them your friend.
Yep.
Reach out to them.
Yep.
I want to thank you so much, Erik, for being here. I want to thank those of you who come and listen to the show all the time for coming and listen. If you like this, please share it with your friends. The only way good things happen and spread is when we like things that are good and we tell our friends about them. If you don't like it, don't do anything with it. It's okay. I'm more than happy for you to just continue to listen and do what you do. Whatever you do, don't be a stranger. Come back next time. Until the next stranger, thank you very much. Peace. Don't be strange. Ciao.
And that was awesome.